Now, I released a video a few months ago breaking down what I thought to be the Emperor's masterpiece of a narrative within Baldurs Gate 3. And I think while the video does a pretty good job of summarizing the story arc we find ourselves taking a part in alongside this deceptive figure, there were a few key points of contention that left myself and some people in the comments asking more questions. More specifically, was the Emperor the one to afflict us with the illithid tadpole to begin with? I'm sure you've heard many people discuss this potential theory concerning our tentacle friend over here, but most of what I've seen brought to the table as evidence was simply that the Mind Flayer looks to be donning the same over-exaggerated Medici collar that we see in the opening cutscene. If that's the first time you're hearing the term Medici collar, don't worry. I had no clue what the hell this thing was called either, and goddamn was it hard to find. Anyways, while it may feel like a sound conclusion just off of some visual parallels we can draw, it goes far deeper than that. Through writings we can find throughout the game, as well as key pieces of dialogue with notable figures along our journey, we can get a better idea as to whether or not the Emperor was truly responsible for everything we've been forced to endure from the very beginning. Welcome to Figuring Out Fantasy, where we'll be getting to the bottom of just who's responsible for the central conflict within Baldurs Gate 3. And as a heads up, aside from the ever-present spoiler warning, this video is going to be frequently referencing observations made in my first video on the Emperor, so make sure if you haven't to watch that first as a foundation for what we'll be exploring today. Before we talk about the Emperor, I think we first need to rule out which candidates many believe to be a potential culprit, but don't quite make the cut as being the one who tadpoled us. First up, there's the very first Mind Flayer we're likely to encounter at the Ravaged Beach in Act 1. Depending on the direction you take after the crash landing, this might even be your most immediate interaction with the overworld. And upon an initial playthrough, it can feel like this one might be responsible considering his vicinity to the crash site of the Nautiloid. In trying to seduce us as a desperate trump card, it gives off an impression that it knows our character from somewhere prior, lending us to believe that there could be a solid chance we've been this close to the abomination once before, perhaps while it was sticking us with a slimy tadpole. But as shown by the Medici collar it possesses, we can quickly shrug off this threat as not being the one who infected us. Hell, I'm not even sure I would call it a threat in its current state, given its desperate attempts to try and get any sort of edge it can over us. As I mentioned in the first part of the video, one of the most recognizable features of the Mind Flayer present in the opening cutscene is its distinct armor. With an almost royal feeling to its presentation, it's going to narrow down the potential candidates to, well, only the Emperor? Now, we don't know entirely too much about the origins of Mind Flayers based on what we can hear so far in the game, so there could be a chance that there are different Mind Flayers that can don this fresh getup, or even switch in and out of it. And we might have to open the possibilities a bit to some other options we have to pick from concerning the appearance of the one who tadpoled us, as there seems to be a pretty blatant explanation farther into Act 1, which sounds like it alone wraps up this entire investigation. But as always, it's not quite that simple. Upon reaching the Goblin encampment a ways into Act 1, we'll find Dror Ragzlin deep in the Shattered Sanctum, who's taking part in a ritual hosted in the name of the Absolute. Although it seems rather odd to call this a ritual when all that's really happening is the Hobgoblin attempting and failing to cast the spell Speak with Dead as he interprets it from the scroll beside him. But the narrator quickly begins to warn us about the possibilities of what could happen were he to actually succeed in speaking with this deceased Mind Flayer. It's revealed that these doorknobs are after a certain weapon, that weapon being the astral prism which we possess. And Ragzlin comes to the conclusion that whoever killed this Mind Flayer could have very likely stolen the artifact from its corpse, proving where his attention would turn to if he could siphon the memories from the abomination before us. Now, there are some conflicting pieces of information that the narrator tells us concerning whether or not this is truly the Mind Flayer who infected us. In the natural course of dialogue with the Hobgoblin, it's said that this is not the Mind Flayer who tormented us.
This Mind Flayer's build is smaller, its garb plainer. A fearsome creature even in death, but not the one that tormented you.
Well, that wraps it up. Nope, I lied, because this narrator has to be playing tricks on us. If we were to find a way to take care of the partakers of this ritual and either swipe the scroll from beside him or have a level 5 cleric or bard in the party, we can have our own instance of speaking with the dead without this Nimrod having influence over the proceedings. Whereas soon as the effects take action, we're told that there's no mistaking it, that this Mind Flayer is responsible for our parasite.
There's no doubt, this creature is responsible for your parasite, and it's waiting for your questions.
Well, that wraps it up. Nope. That doesn't either. That makes things actually pretty confusing. On one hand, we're told outright that this creature wasn't responsible for our torment, but on the other, it was responsible for the parasite? Players won't experience both of these scenarios as part of a single playthrough, as if you proceed through the ritual with Ragzlin and the Goblins, the Mind Flayer can't be spoken with afterwards. so you're likely to only have one side of the story depending on how we proceed with the encounter, and we'll come away with the notion that this creature is either blatantly responsible for our affliction or isn't at all. But by investigating a little deeper, we might be able to learn that both of these statements from the narrator can be true at the same time. When listening to the wordings of each statement, we can determine that they aren't necessarily contradictory to one another. What we hear when taking part in the ritual is that this mind flayer is not responsible for tormenting us, which is true. And what we hear when speaking with the dead on our own is that it was responsible for the parasite which squirms in our mind, which is true. The conclusion we can come to is that there's actually two different mind flayers that were a part of the operation to infect us. One had the responsibility of sourcing the tadpole, while the other executed the action of actually infecting us. And in the opening cutscene, we might even catch a glimpse of this very mind flayer to show the consistency of it not being the culprit we're looking for. After the mysterious figure infects us, he's seen wandering the halls of the Nautiloid, where there's a moment of him glancing down towards a deceased mind flayer, conveniently wearing the same garb as the one who's a part of this ritual. It's my best guess that this is the one we find before us, as he's in the closest proximity to the pool of tadpoles which the one who tormented us pulled ours from. So if we're to rule out this candidate as being the root of our problems, that leaves just one mind flayer to investigate. Now, it sort of feels like we could have guessed that we'd end up here with the Emperor being ultimately the one who's likely responsible. And while many came to their conclusions simply off of the visual similarities we can identify, it seems a bit negligent to use that as a primary reasoning, given what there is to discover within the game itself. Yes, I along with many of you believe this mind flayer to be the very Emperor we end up deceived by and later forced to work alongside, but for far more reasons than what we can draw from our visual analysis of their attire. And hell, going solely off appearance like I did with the first mind flayer can work against those using it as their only evidence, since there's one discrepancy that keeps many fans skeptical of labeling this individual as the Emperor. This one has orange eyes, and this one has purple eyes. No, this isn't Five Nights at Freddy's for all my game theory watchers out there, but it does throw a little bit of a wrench into being able to take that leap into calling this the Emperor. So in order to prove it, we'll have to dig a bit farther into the context surrounding that Nautiloid ship we were all on to begin with. We'll start from the tale that the Emperor tells us after coming to his aid during the big twist at the end of Act 2. While it's not always reliable to refer to what the Emperor has told us as sheer fact, I think the gist of his story can still be understood to be true. As Balduran, the man's first run-in with mind flayers was within Moonrise Towers, and seeing the state Moonrise is in at this point in time, we can determine that this is prior to the Shadow Curse sweeping through the land surrounding it. So that means this flashback takes place while Ketheric Thorm is still under worship of Selûne, or maybe Shar, but the conditions of the towers make me think that he hasn't suffered the notorious tragedy yet. But this isn't entirely important, other than the fact that it presents the information of there being a mind flayer colony beneath Moonrise Towers far before anything concerning the Absolute came into play. He himself was afflicted with an illithid tadpole as an adventurer from Baldurs Gate. He mentioned being a thrall like any other, but even in the scenes depicting his tale, he's dressed in an attire far more dramatic than those around him, proving quite the opposite actually. He eventually escaped the grasp of the Absolute with the help of the Dragon Answer and returned to Baldur's Gate. But we can skip past the stint in the glorious city with Duke Stelmane and go straight to when he's discovered by Gortash and bore back away to the clutches of the Elder Brain. Now, this is where stuff gets really juicy. The Emperor was well within the ranks of the Absolute after having been abducted back to their forces, and it seems that he was in close proximity to Gortash as he was held in high regard as to what he could provide for the Grand Design. But keep in mind that at this point in time, all three Chosen are still in possession of their Netherstones, preventing the Elder Brain from taking full advantage of her influence over her forces. So it could be argued that a figure like Gortash was truly at the helm of operating the Grand Design, considering how he was the Chosen of Bane, the Lord of Tyranny. Why does this matter? Because through some pieces of writing we can find within Act 3, we can prove even further that the Emperor has quite a bit more to do with our affliction than many think. As mentioned before, the Emperor can be taken mostly at his word concerning his life story, but it can easily be assumed that he's leaving out key information. An example of this being how he explains that he managed to escape from the Absolute's influence when it was realistically Ansur who saved him from his conflict. And here what he neglected to inform us about was the origin of why he was searching for the Astral Prism in the first place, and the context of the mission as a whole. But what I won't neglect to inform you about are the benefits of subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. Figuring Out Fantasy is only getting bigger, and with some incredibly rich topics I'll be covering over the horizon, your best bet to catch them once they release is to hit that big ol' subscribe button so they show up right in your home feed. And if you want to help me out even more, liking and commenting is always incredible feedback. But even if you do nothing except watch the rest of this current video, I appreciate it all the same. Before we get into proving more specifics though, there are more pieces which give a pretty good summation of the Grand Design's conception, and in turn, the goals in which they have set out for thralls like the Emperor. Through a piece of writing out of Gortash's private memoir notes, we can discover that the entire plot to enslave an Elderbrain was laid out by Mephistopheles after the control of the crown of Karsus fell into his hands. While Gortash was deep in the hells to swipe the crown alongside the Dark Urge, he couldn't help but take this book as well, considering the synergies that the plot had with his god Bane. The central plan is laid out in detail within the book named Accelerated Grand Design, titled directly after the one he found in the hells, where Gortash writes a summary of the elaborate scheme. What we're most interested in here is the portion reading, "The central element of this plan is that our dominated Elderbrain lays elithid tadpoles that induce a state of suspended ceremorphosis, in which the host does not transform into a mind flayer. Instead, the tadpole becomes psychic minions of a hive mind of the Elderbrain, which they perceive as a goddess, a deity of conquest called the Absolute." Here, we can begin to piece together what makes our possession of the Astral Prism so unique, all while getting a feeling that it serves a far greater purpose than just a means of protection. Hell, even the conception of this artifact alone would prove its value towards the Grand Design's downfall, especially considering who created it, or at least who I can best assume created it. As we can learn, Prince Orpheus is bound by infernal chains to have his power siphoned within the Astral Prism, and that power was aimed to be used as a countermeasure against the Grand Design. But this is a Githyanki artifact. Why would there be aspects of infernal association in its contents? Well, Vlaakith actually turned to infernal persuasion in pursuit of the prism's creation, where she would sign a pact with the devil in order to attain the grasp she desired over Orpheus. And I think that devil is none other than our favorite Disney villain, Raphael. The pieces just fit together perfectly based on the subtle context laid throughout the game. If Mephistopheles, Raphael's father, was the original creator of the plan to assume control of a hive mind through the use of an Elderbrain, it would only make sense with how we know Raphael's relationship with his father to be, that he would love nothing more than for Mephistopheles' plan to go up in flames. So, before the Chosen had any involvement in the scheme, Raphael made this deal with Vlaakith so that there would be a hidden trump card to go against his father if he had used the Crown of Karsus before it was swiped by Gortash and the Dark Urge. You ever wonder why he has the Orphic Hammer in his House of Hope? Think it's just a coincidence that he has the one tool that can be used to break the function of what the Astral Prism was created for? Raphael is smarter than to make a deal without contingencies. He always has a backup plan, now being able to offer us the hammer he made in exchange for the Crown of Karsus. Back to the artifact's relevance as part of our current story, any infected that would come in contact with it would regain their senses and be able to withstand the Elderbrain's influence, and in turn, Gortash's influence now that he has lead control over the Crown of Karsus, leaving the possibility that whoever finds this legendary artifact may band together with others to fight back. So it was of the utmost importance that the Astral Prism be taken under their control, leaving nothing up to possibilities, leading to what would be known as the Astral Prism Heist as described in the book named Astral Prism Heist. Here, Gortash writes, "After that dream I had with the Githyanki threat to our accelerated grand design, my research led me to pore through the old archive led behind in Moonrise Towers by the High Heralds. These records included some surprisingly early sources, both Githyanki and Githzerai, that mention a relic or artifact called the Astral Prison, or Prism. Though the source of its power was unstated, this was reputed to be able to project a field that disrupted elithid psionics. Such an artifact would clearly be an existential threat to both our absolute ambitions and the grand design. All three of the ancient sources agreed that the Astral Prism was in the hands of the Githyanki Lich Queen, Vlaakith. Thus was born a plan to send a tadpoled strike team in a regrown nautiloid piloted by the Emperor to steal the Astral Prism from Vlaakith. Now, this piece of writing spells it out pretty clearly. The Emperor was at the head of a strike team dedicated towards swiping the Astral Prism from the Githyanki and Vlaakith. And as evidence of what we see before we even take our first steps in the game, there are countless Githyanki in pursuit of a nautiloid through region after region of Faerun within the opening cutscene, with our pilot going so far as to take a stroll through Avernus as avoiding measures. It seems that this Mind Flayer wanted to be rid of this opposition at all cost. Well, from those involved in this conflict alone, it can be assumed that the Astral Prism is on board this very nautiloid. But even further than that, we can confirm this to be true based on our Sharan friend Shadowheart. Once we crash land onto the ravaged beach, Shadowheart is likely one of the first companions you'll run into, and it becomes apparent that she's got some secrets concerning a shiny little artifact she keeps concealed from view, this being the Astral Prism. Now we can learn much more about her origins throughout the game by means of dialogue and context through quest lines, and it traces back farther than we may have expected. Shadowheart was also sent on a mission to retrieve the Astral Prism, but in her circumstances, she was deployed from Baldurs Gate by her Sharan superiors, and after quite a large amount of adversity facing her group, she was naturally the only member left on the team she was sent on, being the only healer amongst them. So Shadowheart would go on to find the Astral Prism and end up where we found her locked in this elaborate pod. Well, that proves it. We were on the Nautiloid at the same time as the Astral Prism. So in turn, we can also determine that this was the very Nautiloid headed by the Emperor as mentioned in the Astral Prism heist written by Gortash. But where did the Emperor disappear to between when he supposedly infects us and when we save the ship from Avernus? In the chaos of maneuvering the Nautiloid through a trench run style sequence, after the destruction, he slips into the Astral Prism held by Shadowheart after winding up in Avernus. He likely found her to be one of the best adventurers to travel alongside within the artifact, as she had no trace of a purpose other than Shar's wishes, giving him somebody dedicated to a cause in direct conflict with the Elder Brain, and as a result, a solid chance of breaking down the grand design as a whole. And in putting together all the pieces of context and timing, we can prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that this is the Emperor who afflicts us with an illithid tadpole. Many will still point to the orange eyes versus the purple eyes, and I honestly can't find a way to explain that. Maybe you guys can help me out in the comments to determine why that is. But this is absolutely the Emperor here, providing an extra layer to the course of events which play out through the game. If you want to see more, I made another in-depth video on the Emperor's deception and manipulation that you can check out here. And with all of these conclusions in mind, I'll never be able to look at the Dream Guardian the same way again. If you made it till the end, thanks for watching. Since you made it this far, you might as well subscribe. And if you're already subscribed and are looking for further ways to support me in the work I do, I just made a Patreon where my supporting members will be featured at the end of every video. And even further than that, the higher the tier, the more influence you have over the videos that I make for you. Things like ad-free videos days before they go live on YouTube, or even being able to vote on the next video I make. There are plenty of benefits to becoming a patron. But even if all you can do is just leave a like and comment on the video, I appreciate everything all the same. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.